Welcome to the Awe and Wonder podcast. We're talking about literacy in this series, and we have a special guest today, Elisa Wern. We're so excited. So
Hello.
I'm Sarah Kinsella,
And I'm Brenda Del Monte.
and here we have Elisa. Elisa, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm very happy to be here today, talk about one of my passion topics for sure. I live in Florida. I am an occupational therapist by background and work for a school system here doing assistive technology, curriculum supports, pretty much a little bit of everything. And also work a little bit in Texas as an OT, doing that, doing occupational and assistive technology supports. So
All right, great. Well, and we know you from your Facebook group, focus on comprehensive literacy for all. What's the official group name, Melissa?
Comprehensive Literacy for All book study.
That's right. Okay.
What round are you on at this moment?
So depending on when this podcast airs, we will be in the middle of round 6, which will be starting later this month, early September.
So tell us how that works, the rounds.
Well,
Yeah,
first of
so
all,
this
how
is
did it get started? Let's talk
Oh
about
my
how it got
goodness.
started.
One of
Yeah.
those things that when Karen Erickson and David Copenaver's book first came out, there were a couple of us that worked in a different spots in the world that wanted to just kind of go through it together. So I was like, well, let's use this as a medium. Started that group in January of 2020 with no idea we would land where we were or that there would be a global pandemic in the middle of this, but started that group with the intention of 20 or so of us kind of working through the book and being able to comment. And didn't at that point name it round 1, but that was essentially what we started with, was let's work through this book systematically and talk about what we don't know and talk about what we're curious about and talk about what we tried and was a miserable failure, and just know better, do better kind of philosophy. And so we did that first round and thought, well, that went well. And other people started asking, and I was like, well, we could do this again. Thus, round 2 was born. And all these many years later, we just are finished up the middle of August in round 5. And overwhelmingly, there was a request for round 6. So we are going to dive in again for the 6th kind of ideation of this, going through the book, but we're going to do it in a slightly different way. We've kind of done it differently every round.
Is it a book? Is it a chapter a week, a chapter a month? How do you guys do it?
So everyone's favorite answer, it depends. So in the first couple of rounds, it was a little more structured of we're going to do a chapter every 2 weeks or so. We clustered some of the beginning matter chapters together in a little bit less timing, and then in that regard kind of followed a 2-week structure. We have done kind of fast track rounds where we were more reviewing than diving deep. And then round 6 is probably going to be more on the dive deep side, kind of case study based, basically following 2 learners through the book, that are kind of an amalgamation of everybody I've ever worked with in my career as an emergent or conventional literacy learner.
Ooh, I'm excited
So
about round
yeah,
6.
it's a different spin. I keep trying to kind of reinvent the wheel of, for somebody that's been with us since round 1 or round 2, how can we as an adult learner, take something new away? The same format over and over again isn't necessarily going to bring different results. So looking at, we focused a little bit more on implementation the last couple of rounds, and then we're going to do the same, but with a very specific kind of either get a student in your mind or follow along with our 2 students who have yet to be named, in their case study journey.
Well, this just leads straight into our first question. So if you go back in the beginning of your career, maybe is there a student that comes to mind that just made you go, oh my goodness, everyone can learn to read and write? Someone that you realized I have to take a deeper dive. I mean, you're an occupational therapist, so literacy is not necessarily what you're gravitated to. So I know a lot of times when we reflect on our careers, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't talk about them all. And there's bits and pieces from everyone you've worked with, I'm sure. But who comes to mind when you think about that?
So I do have some, but first I want to correct the misconception that OTs do not have a role in literacy learning.
Thank you.
AOTA actually has I don't know if it's officially a fact sheet or a memo, but I can share the link that you can put in show notes that talks about OT's roles in literacy. And a lot
Yay.
of times it comes with what we would more traditionally think the writing portion of literacy that OTs
Right.
would support. And that absolutely, when we talk about access to the alphabet, it's one place that OTs are just the way that we view things. It's very easy for us to think of possibilities for many students who somebody would at first value go, well, I don't know, is there a way? And I really, I'm going to take a little bit of a cop out answer. I think it's a collection of learners over 20 plus years. Oftentimes it's all in my area. I do a lot of work with kids who have very complex needs. So sometimes that's physical complexity or communication, most often both. And in thinking about this question, the two students that kind of come to mind are, one is an eye gaze user who I've had the fortune of following from when they were a 3-year-old kid entering our school system to now being high school. And I think in that case, it was more about building rapport with the family to help them see like there's not a magic wand we can wave to make this process faster or quicker, but that it was about trusting the process and trusting us and us trusting them with their kiddo, to know, how are we going to come to this solution that works for everybody together.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the second student's really a student who has long since graduated and I think had a lot of literacy attempts and literacy failures as the world went on because it was an older student. And I think finding the right access method for them to have access to the alphabet just kind of ultimately changed the trajectory of their schooling, and put them in a place where they were able to communicate what they wanted when they wanted to everybody. And fortunately for them, all these years of instruction that they had been taking in was just kind of hanging out inside of them. And they needed some opportunities to be able to get that information out.
So
Right.
what was their best access method?
So for that student, it was a combination of a paper image of an old IntelliKeys keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
That was their go-to to type things out. And we transitioned them to a dynamic device that allowed them access to a keyboard that was very similar. But the old fallback of sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution, they were very quick utilizing that method.
Interesting.
Nice. No, I wish we could bring back IntelliKeys.
Well, funny enough, the blue keyboards still are completely functional. And as one of my side projects, I worked with AT Makers which is a 501c3, to revitalize that so that it can be used on a Chromebook, it can be used on an iPad, it can be used on any device, Mac, Windows, and is still able to be used as an adapted keyboard. It's
Nice.
for a lot of learners, it is the right tool.
Yeah.
It's the just right tool, whether you have a key guard or not, in providing access to the alphabet.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. And it's around. So many of us will open that closet and say, yay.
Absolutely. If you see a blue keyboard, do not throw it away.
Yeah.
It can absolutely be utilized. And if you don't have a need for it, we can connect a user to you that does.
Elisa, you mentioned a couple times already about access to the alphabet. And I'm sure you have more to say about that. And I'm kind of thinking that might be one of these guiding principles I'm about to ask you about. What are some guiding principles you've learned along the way in your role with AAC and literacy?
So I could do my darndest to summarize it well. I lean into the 10 elements that Karen Erickson and David Copenaver talk about in their book. And at any given moment, working with a student or a family, one or more of them resonate across, the situation, making sure there are knowledgeable others around that user. I may be able to be there once or twice a week, but there may be others that need to know how do they do A, B, and C. making sure, I think probably the biggest struggle that is a mind shift for special education administrators and educators is that our students should have 2 hours or 90 minutes at minimum of literacy. And making that work in a classroom structure that, again, because of mindset, may have transitioned to, I'm going to use air quotes if you're listening, just audio wise, functional skills. And I think when I think about big picture, long-term functional skills, there is no more functional skill than literacy. And when we think about what do we want our learners, if you work in a K-12, pre-K-12 system, when they leave us at 21, 22, whatever your state-like guideline is, if we could leave them with one skill, it should be literacy. All these other skills are really important, but literacy is kind of like that gateway skill that if they have all the literacy in the world in whatever manner works for them, they're going to be able to be successful at whatever their post-school outcome is, right? And at the same time, like one of my student examples for you was an older student. It is never too late. I probably every other week either get a Facebook message from a parent or a teacher or see in the Facebook group, well, my son or daughter is 29, is 30, is 19. Is it too late for them? Absolutely not. Would we have loved to have that intervention from when they were 3 on? Yes, but we have families and educators all over the world that are working on comprehensive literacy structures for students that are well past, school age. And I think when I think about the big picture of like my story of how I jumped into comprehensive literacy, it really was from the access method perspective, right? Whether that's access to a communication device or access to the alphabet. And I think it's important that we're doing as good a job doing collaborative work among the professions and not get into SLPs own AAC. They're the language masters, absolutely. But there are other pieces of the access, how it's mounted, what they may need to access it. Just like I don't want to claim to own independent living skills as an OT. And that the language and structures, and obviously for PT's support in there is vital. And the better job we do being collaborative partners, the better outcomes we have for our learners. And I have yet to meet a student who was too disabled, too blind, too visually impaired to learn literacy skills.
I love what
does
you're
it
saying.
take longer? Is it more of a struggle? Do you have to work harder? Yes, but I really, when I think about or get asked to look at a new student situation, those things all are kind of bouncing around in my mind that like we may mess up a lot before we find the right setup. And then when we find the right setup, it's lots and lots of repetition over and over again, making it interesting along the way. But that's way more than guiding principles, but
that's okay.
But
We
I love
love
what
that.
you're saying. I think one of the guiding principles then is that you need to be collaborative in how you're approaching it, especially for those with complex bodies. And we always say that access trumps language and literacy, meaning the best language system in the world, the best device, whatever you think that is, the best literacy instruction, the student has to independently access and respond to questions being asked or letters being put in front of them. I remember going into a classroom, the student was on eye gaze and he had yes and no taped to his tray and he couldn't move his hands. He couldn't see his tray based on his positioning and so I was like, what are we doing there?
Yeah. Is it there for the adults? Is it there to look nice? It's obviously not functional.
And so it was hand over hand on that. And I was like, so again, I think the access piece is something that we as maybe special ed teachers, definitely as speech pathologists, don't get enough training on, rarely gets talked about. When you think about how large the field of speech pathology is as far as voice and stuttering and all kinds of things, when you think about the percentage of people that in speech pathology that are working with complex bodies, it's small, and therefore the instruction in grad school or any other time is limited. So you better be working with your OT, because if not, you're measuring access, You're not measuring knowledge. You're not measuring cognition. You're not measuring comprehension. You're measuring access. They always pick the one on the right. That's the
Yeah,
only one.
how well does their body work? That's what you're
Yes,
measuring.
that's what you're
And
measuring.
the reason assistive technology exists is to switch that to being able to measure what do they truly know, not what can their body tell you.
Right.
Right, right.
Alyssa, I want to go back to something you said about the time it takes to do comprehensive literacy instruction in a classroom and the time it should take, and how I think you mentioned that that's a pretty big hurdle or challenge, right? Teachers have so much going on, so many needs that are different than, and when I think we think about our schedules, it's like, you want me to do what? How long? Um, do you have any tips, or how have you seen this work well in classrooms?
Yeah, I think first it's that mindset shift to know, like, yes, all those other things important. It's important that we, get through their self-care routines. Those are all really important things. And for me, it's about finding the right pockets of the day. I think it's often very overwhelming to tell an educator, or for an educator to be told, you have to find 90 minutes to do literacy. And if you're mirroring what's happening in gen ed, that's a full 90-minute block like of instruction. And we know for a lot of our learners, that's not going to work.
Right.
So for me, it's about strategically across the day, where can we embed literacy in routines that matter, right? Can they sign in when they come in the morning? Can they, indicate their choice of what they want for lunch if they're eating by mouth? Where can we embed literacy activities across a day so that when we do the sum total of those literacy activities, we're getting as close to that 90 minutes? And I think, if I were to say anything, it would be like, don't get overwhelmed by the 90 minutes. Just start adding literacy.
That's
Start
good.
adding activities. I think, and it's not about, we said, talking about the best AAC device. It's not even really just about what's the best literacy curriculum for students who have complex needs. The best curriculum is not going to be a surprise to any special educator who has worked in education for any length of time. It is pieces of a bunch of different curriculums.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in Gainesville, Florida, where they actually piloted and have researched the UFly literacy program for phonemic awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
our district uses that K2 district wide. It's now used all over the world. We have complex learners who are making great gains in that component of literacy, right? It's only one piece of it. So we're borrowing from that to do the phonics and phonemic awareness portion of alphabet knowledge portion of our literacy instruction. And we're looking elsewhere for, how do we build comprehension in? How do we do this? How do we build writing in? Right. So unfortunately, as is the way in special education, there's not a what can I purchase off the shelf that's going to magically work for all my learners. That's not how special education has ever been for complex learners. And I hope it's not ever how it is, because I think then we get in this rut of, we can only do it if we have a boxed curriculum. And, when you look across what is best practice, whether it's emergent or conventional literacy, it's really about, how are we engaging that learner in alphabet routines and shared reading and writing experiences, whether that is independent writing or us helping support them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the more that we're able to not look at it as a big block of 90 minutes, which is scary, right? Like, that's a
Right.
lot of on time that is required of our educators and of our learners. But the more we look at it as, where can we infuse 90 minutes of literacy instruction across our day in a way that supports them, that they're getting access to all the components. And if you can't start with all the components, that's okay. The goal is, where is a place we could start with more next?
Mm-hmm.
Love
And I
that.
think you make a good point about the boxed curriculum. Sometimes the boxed curriculum goes so far as to even be scripted. And the thing is I would say what we're missing in, if we even want that, is we're missing student choice. We're missing a lot of the pieces that make literacy interesting and make it relevant. Why does R matter to you? Because your brother's name is Robert. I mean, that's not in any curriculum, right? So it's like we have to do it the way it's, where we're taking solid research-based strategies from a variety of curriculum. But allowing there to be student choice and variability in there so that it stays interesting and so that it stays age appropriate, because a lot of the boxed curriculum for emergent literacy is very young, and because it's for general education. And if you have an older user at that level, that box curriculum is baby talk, so to speak, right?
It's not going to be super age respectful. And I think it's great that we're in a space today that we do have literacy curriculum options, right? That is like if we were talking 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, back when podcasts barely existed, like we would not be saying, well, there are options. It's about, incorporating student choice and voice and picking what works, right? Like we've seen success with YouFly, so we are throwing that in there with other things because it's also a language our teachers know, right? If your district is using Haggerty, another like whatever that phonemic or phonics program is, and you as a special educator want to go, hey, how could we use this with our learners? Absolutely, right? Then it gives you access to training that every teacher is getting, right? There's a lot of advantages to taking a general ed support and modifying it or adapting it to your needs, but there's also a place for, here's some really great resources that have been developed. And I'm happy to give you guys a list of things that we know people have pulled from. I'm never going to say what's the best curriculum out there. But if you want to add some stuff to the show notes, I can toss you some links.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm wondering what your approach might be to people that are resistant to using keyboards or alternative keyboards, and really, really hammering the handwriting. And there's that comes from all sides, right? Sometimes parents are like, no, they need to be able to write their name or whatever. And then you feel like the whole writing part of literacy is at a standstill until the penmanship is legible. So can you talk a little bit about how you can move forward with, and particularly the writing piece
component, yeah.
when you have the motor skills for potentially doing handwriting, but they're 10 and they hate it. And it's so hard to, as an SLP, to think about incorporating a writing piece when the minute you pull out a pencil and a paper, they're throw it, leave, have a fit. So it's like, how do we balance that? The teams kind of, well, we don't want to give up on handwriting, and I want to move literacy forward regardless of the legibility of the handwriting.
Yeah, we could do an entire podcast episode about just handwriting and what OTs really think and how does this all fit into literacy. That's a whole other episode, but I'll try to give you my 2 minutes or less synopsis. I think two things when I think about maybe reluctant, or you've got somebody on the team that it is very like they need to be able to write. One is it starts even before that conversation happens. It starts back as you've been building rapport with whoever it is on that student's team. It's about being able to come alongside whoever it is and just kind of talk your way through your thinking, because often it's not you're diametrically opposed. It's just, I see they like to pick up a pencil and do things. Is handwriting possible? And the second, I think, is asking the question of, does it make the most sense? Is it the most efficient and effective way for them to convey what they know? It might be the most efficient and effective way for them to write their name or to label things as their own, right? It probably won't be the most efficient or effective way for them to show us that they've understood a story by retelling it by writing, right? Or to write a story on their own. And when you've built rapport with a family or a teacher, whoever is kind of saying, but handwriting, I'll often say, can you just give me a week? Will you trust me for a week? And then we try both. I have them try a keyboard out. I have them try handwriting out. And then the proof is kind of in the data, right? It's this student may not have known where all the keys were, but man, they were able to string together 3 words twice as fast as they could write those 3 words. And I think it's about, being able to show, like, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Long term, especially if it's a family member, long term, is it tied to what they see as their post-school outcome for their learner, which often that is. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's impossible to kind of unwind that ball of, but I always thought they'd be able to write when they graduated. And I'm not ever going to give up on written production. I'm going to talk about what method is going to be most effective and efficient for that learner.
Mm-hmm.
And again, depending on what it is, I have learners that will default to typing in their notes app, their grocery list. And when I think about having a conversation with another adult, I ask them, well, how do you make your grocery list? How do
Right.
how do you make a jot of all the things you have to bring to work tomorrow? And if it's they open up their calendar and they put it in the app, I kind of say, well, you know what? I want that same outcome for your learner. And that's a typing skill.
Right. And we
So
all
I
have
often
different
don't close
methods.
the conversation as an either or. I think of it as a both and let's talk about for this task, let's break down the most efficient and effective. Those two E's are very, very uh, concise as my theory, but I think that they're really important because nobody wants to do anything that's hard for them. And
Mm-hmm.
they're going to spend the bare minimum amount of time doing it if it's not efficient or effective.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. Great. Great answer. I think you did it in 2 minutes.
Yeah. And I
Um,
agree. We need more conversations around it.
yes. Yes. Um, Alyssa, what do you feel? I mean, you were obviously very passionate about that, but what are you most passionate about related to AAC and literacy?
I think I definitely have a heart for learners that a lot of people have passed by in their educational
Mm,
career and have said, I just don't know how I don't know how to make this happen for them. And I think it's tied to me. I do a lot of work in the area of AAC. It's tied to me in having the right communication system. And I intentionally use the word system because I don't think a single device equals a communication system for a learner because that device doesn't really work on a beach and doesn't really want to work and when it's raining all that well. So I think having a good system is tied hand in hand to literacy. And again, like we talked about earlier, if they can't access that system, it's just a really expensive paperweight.
mhm.
So making sure that we're making good decisions, and especially if it's a funded device, anybody who works in AAC feels the pressure of it's a 5 to 6 year decision if you're doing funded through private insurance or Medicaid. And that's a big ask to have a crystal ball enough to feel like where is that literacy learner going to be in 5 years? But if they can't access it in year one, it's going to be a paperweight for a chunk of
Right.
that time. And
Another good reason to collaborate, right?
and
Get everyone
absolutely,
on the
when they're
team.
doing those trials, often it's, an SLP has zeroed in on for many reasons, this is a good language setup for them. And there are so many things that we can do in any of the apps to adjust it to meet our access needs. Sarah Gregory is an SLP who works in AAC, and I wrote a book chapter specifically looking at how do we adjust it for a learner who has sensory integration or sensory processing needs. Like,
Mhm.
what are settings we can make in an AAC device? Because I saw a lot of learners, she's in a whole different state, but I saw a lot of learners where I was that because of their tactile sensitivities or their visual needs, that we were having a large refusal to use a device. And it wasn't because they didn't have anything to say. They had lots to say. It was just, we know for a lot of kids who have sensory processing issues, it kind of triggers that pain pathway almost for them. Like, this is the same thing for us touching a hot stove as a lot of our kids' sensory needs. So being able to find that just right setup, once we've decided as a team on that language system and you guys have said, hey, you know what, we're using app A or we're going to go with this device, no matter what that device is, there are lots of things we can do to adjust for access, for sensory processing needs, and make it the just right setup, not just this is
Mhm.
the right one, but make it really customized and just right for that individual learner.
Alyssa, how do we find that chapter you were talking about?
So I can send you a copy, the link to the book. You're gonna quiz me right now, and I'm not gonna remember the name of the
That's
total
okay.
book, but it's a case study approach to implementing AAC. And I've actually heard from quite a few SLPs that work in universities that they're using it in their courses, which
Great.
makes me excited because I know the amount of AAC that happens in a lot of SLP programs, and it's not much.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything we can do to make that that knowledge base that you all as SLPs come out with be wider about AAC is
That's
great.
great.
But I can definitely get you the link so that you can link it. I'm a bad author. I make no money from the book, but I'm a bad author if I can't remember the title of the book.
That's okay. That's okay.
So
Um,
you are managing this Facebook group, and what we have realized, Sarah and I do consultative services through the Special Ed Tech Center, and so people come on, and everyone's knowledge base is different, and their lived experiences are different. And we might say something. I mean, obviously, we know if we say an acronym, they might know it, but I'm just saying we might just talk about a strategy, and we realize that it didn't land for everyone the same because they don't have anything that they're building it from. Some of them are building foundation, others have honed skills, so it lands differently. I think the book Comprehensive Literacy for All was written very succinctly, very clearly. Having said that, I also know, because we've done book studies as well on that, there's a variety of interpretations. So first of all, what is it hard to play your role, and what is your role? Like, because you're not the literacy police in this. I have been on the Facebook groups since, so
Don't want that title.
don't
Nope.
want
Nope,
that.
nope, nope.
Nope. So, but I think it relates to comments on the Facebook post for sure, but also just even if you're not part of any of that, it's like you go in, you do a training, you're excited, you leave, you come back, and they latched onto one thing, and they didn't listen to the disclaimers before, and they didn't listen to the generalization skills after that, and you realize, ooh, that they got part of it, So I'm wondering how you manage, just other professionals, getting partial information or teaching from this space of partial information. How do we manage that as professionals?
That's a big and loaded question. So I would say first in the Facebook group, as the rounds have gone on, I've been careful. Like, yes, I'm the administrator of that group, but I feel like the community owns that group. I'm
Yeah.
very intentional about, like, unless it's something very blatant, like I try to stay in the lane of providing a space for support. Now, if there's something that is 100% left field, if they're posting something that is very clearly not research based, I'm either going to make a comment about it, or we're going to, I do have some relationship with Dr. Erickson, and she does, people who are in the group will see that she does post. And I think we've kind of worked out a good rhythm of, we want to encourage people from where they are to the next step.
Right.
And where that's going to be is different for you. It's different for me. It's different for everybody who's experiencing the book. I mean, in a new round, I may have a learner who literally somebody put this book on their desk at the start of pre-planning and said, you've got to do this year. And I
Right.
have somebody who's been doing this work of literacy with their learner, whether that's as an educator or a parent, for 5 years.
Right.
So kind of meeting in the middle and saying, here's where I would guide you. Here's some research about it. There are a lot of really great from an educator's perspective, but parent friendly resources. We maintain a file depository. Pretty much every question that's ever been asked, you can search within the Facebook group. And I will either, comment on the post and say, hey, the understanding based on, current best practice is,
mm-hmm.
kind of let us get an answer out there. And then it's not a you're wrong, I'm right, because
Right.
that just feels icky for everyone involved.
And that's not the
And
goal of your group at
it's
all. Yeah.
absolutely going to accomplish the exact opposite. You're going to get somebody who either leaves in a tirade of upset and says, see, those comprehensive literacy people, they're just mean if we don't
Right.
100% follow them, right? And the whole goal is, let's change understandings, right? Like, if you've been in this profession for a while, we didn't always have access to a robust set of research about what does work with
Right.
our learners. We would have studies that were N of one, that had one participant as a case,
Right.
and so now that we do have kind of collections, Erickson and Copenaver's book being one of those sources, we're able to lean into and pull in, what do we know that's working, and they're continuing to evolve too. The last couple of places I've been where Erickson has been presenting, they're kind of looking at this building bridges model of comprehensive literacy. And what does that look like when, which is reality, we're sitting with classrooms that have kids that are both emergent and conventional, and how do we make that work? And I think the middle of the road is probably the truest and best place for our educators and our parents to lean into, because I have yet to see a student that is 100% emergent, really, or 100% conventional. Just like we all have different levels of skills in our day-to-day jobs, we have kids that are like, I love letters and my alphabet knowledge is like ready for conventional literacy, but maybe my comprehension isn't. And so I
Right.
think kind of staying with the trends of what we know about research-based best practice is kind of the guiding force. And then it's just a lot about coming alongside. The coaching I provide in that comprehensive Facebook group is not any different than what I would do sitting across from a teacher in a classroom. It's, where are you? What questions do you have? Let's like talk through this. And if it's not making sense, like, okay, let's go back and ask those questions. Like, to me, what I love about the community in that group is that oftentimes a question will be asked, and it might be, I'm looking for a resource, or I really don't get this. Like, how can somebody who can't hold a pencil write? A question will be posed in the group, and maybe I'm at work that day and it's 5 hours before I see the group. By the time I've gotten to go and answer a question, at least 5 other people have popped in with, hey, have you seen this? Or have you tried this? Or my daughter had that problem and here's what I was able to do. So I feel like combining those two things helps. Like, yes, giving guidance when needed about, here's what we understand about best practice. And a lot of times it's just didn't know that, like didn't realize. I think the most popular example is simulated text. Didn't realize that doesn't aid in comprehension, but yes,
Right.
it's still critical for our AAC users to use while communicating. Those spaces are places for education and coaching and not for chastisement. If we
Right.
come
Right.
down with a hammer of literacy that says you're wrong, well, chances are we've done way more harm than good, and that learner is who really loses.
Right.
I know. And you know what I will say? I love your graphics. I mean, you do incredible graphics, and every once in a while I see a graphic and I'm like, oh, somebody asked something and she made a graphic about it.
I don't know if it's because it helps me to kind of
Yeah. Conceptualize
encapsulate
it.
what's happening,
Yeah.
or I've also really gotten great feedback from within the group. I have lots of people who've gone on to do their own book studies and have said, hey, can we use it? Yes, use those
Yeah.
graphics, please.
Hmm.
Like,
You
I
led
just say
us
don't
to different
alter it
ORs.
and make it funky, but like, use those graphics. If it helps somebody to do the work of literacy, to see it in the way that we've displayed it, yes, please. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I'm just kind of a Canva tinkerer in my spare time, and I try to think about, if I had never seen this material before, is there
Hmm.
a way I can visually represent it in a way
Yeah.
that someone could look at it and go, oh, that makes sense. And
Yes.
it's like visuals don't work for everybody, just like they don't in our classrooms. And so finding ways that are both visual and in discussion questions to kind of guide things, I
Hmm.
think is
But
helpful.
I think you've done a good job, and some of the visuals have not too much content on it, so that you can post it and it's not overwhelming. I highly recommend you throwing them all together on Teachers Pay Teachers or something. I think if I could have access to the stack of those, I
So
would.
here's what I will tell you. I will never sell them.
Okay.
And
Well, you,
anybody who emails me, I will share them with them.
All right.
I'm not ever gonna sell that work, because I feel like we already have a high bar for a lot of our educators or parents to access this material.
Mhm.
And to me, this group and these images are all about how do we make this material accessible. And in terms of when I think about, my microcosm of effect and my, spreader, it's if somebody wants to use these visuals in a book study, and I know I'm setting myself up for like a mega ton of requests, and that's okay, just be patient.
Or you could put it on Teachers Pay Teachers for free.
Is that like I want this to be accessible, and I want our parents to feel as equally enabled as our
I
educators,
see.
that
Yeah.
that they can come to the table and say, and I've had parents do this, in Erickson and Copenhaver's book, I was reading that blah, blah, blah. Where does shared reading happen during the day? And
Mhm.
I love it when parents do that,
Mm-hmm.
because I can tell that they're thinking about what's best practice, and I can tell that what they want. I know what their goal is for their learner.
Right.
Um,
I
and
love that. And yeah, I think that that's one of the benefits of social media, right? Is those quick clips that as long as we take them and either say, I need to learn more about this, or I'm going to read some discussion about it, but we can take that and parents who have often very little time to do training and read the books and all that can grab those things. That I think that's fantastic. And it's so nice that we have the resources.
yeah, every once in a while, I think about, I want to do a poll in the group and see percentage of parents versus percentage of educators. I know the
Mm-hmm.
data would not be clean, because we have parents who are educators and educators who are parents and providers. And but I mean, I am always pleasantly surprised that very often in those first 5 answers that they get answered before, more than one of them is a parent.
I love that.
I
Fantastic.
think we're doing our work, and this is internationally, that we play the time zone game great on Facebook, because if a question gets posted and somebody from Australia answers, like there are often answers before somebody is up in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think that does help, and the international perspective that,
Yeah.
down in that part of the world, they've got Jane Farrell doing amazing comprehensive literacy for all work, and they get the benefit of their kind of rich learning there that they can then share out with other people. So like I said,
Definitely.
starting in January 2020, if you had told me we would land here now, which I think the last time I looked, it was 6,000 some people, I would have probably laughed in your face and said, that's an interesting thought. Not in any sense of the word did I ever think that we'd be here now. And when I'm having a tough day and something isn't going right, I can always kind of go back to that group and go, you know what though, like so and so and so and so got information they needed today. And
Mm-hmm.
we never really know what the ripple effect of that is going to be. But if we keep providing resources in a way that our educators, if they're in a place, their workplace is not necessarily supporting this, and they're one person on an island or the only person in their school doing this, providing that community in other ways, I think is critical, because comprehensive literacy work for complex kids, it's hard work.
It
Like,
is.
I don't want anybody to walk away and think, oh, all you have to do is join a Facebook group and you're going to know how to do all this stuff. It's
Right.
hard work, because our kids have hard situations sometimes. Kids,
Mm-hmm.
not all of them are kids. Our learners have hard situations, right? And being able to know that if you try something and it didn't work out, there's a space where you can come and make an ask, you
Right.
know, or if you're just like, I just don't even, what's step one? There's a
Right.
space where you can come and say, like, I'm new to this stuff, but here's my learner. And
Right.
fortunately, we've never had a space that an educator kind of violated, FERPA or HIPAA, parents posting pictures, that's all on, within their power. We've been able to create a space where people can feel safe to ask those questions. And, that's what having this community of knowledgeable others, it's important for the learner to make progress in literacy, but I think it's equally important for the team that's surrounding them.
Yes. And that's why we're checking that Facebook page at 10 at night and working hard. You mentioned, if someone comes and they want to know where to start. And that's a question that Brendan and I had for you is what would you say for someone who is looking for a place to start with comprehensive literacy, or what have people said in your posts that
Yeah. So I think the biggest encouragement I could give is just start, right? Like if your learner is super alphabet interested or loves to sit and read books with you, like pick a place that feels manageable to kind of bite off and start with. There's really, some good comprehensive literacy instruction is better than no instruction at all. And so I don't want people to feel the pressure of, I've got 90 minutes and I've got to do all these types of literacy within it. It's okay, what can we add this week? And then wait 2 weeks and let's try that. And if we did predictable chart writing for a while and we've got that routine now, what's another space we could add on? Because I think that the biggest thing I would say is don't let the fear of this is overwhelming paralyze you. Start with what you know. If you're an educator, you know good literacy, you know what it's like to read a book, right? Mm-hmm. So sit with that learner and read a book and maybe start the process of saying, I'm not going to pepper them with questions, right? We're just going to kind of do a book walk and see what they notice. What do they point to? Can I comment about that without asking a question? Lean into resources that are already out there. My Facebook group that I help support is just one of them, but there are lots of resources out there. And I think, if we can lean into a learner's interests and start moving them forward in literacy, then it starts to feel less overwhelming, right? Like our kids love to have small victories, and so do we too, as adult facilitators of learning, right? Being able to get a goal that is literacy focused. Maybe again, we add shared reading or we start to do independent writing stations, and you might try something and it might not work, and that's okay. I think sometimes in special education, we forget that happens in general education classes too, that a teacher prepares an amazing lesson about such and such story and it just bombs, right? Like we need to give ourselves permission to fail, and that's okay. And it's also really important to model that failure no matter how uncomfortable it feels for our learners, right? Because it's something they experience probably more often than we do. I tried something and I couldn't do it. We need to model it's okay. You know what? I'm going to ask for help with that, or I'm going to find a new way and we're going to try again. I think just start. And that seems like a very I don't know, postcard saying way to talk about how do we start? But I think it's just start. We have tons of people who are quote unquote lurkers in the Facebook group and will message me and will apologize for just being a lurker. And I'm like, you do what works for you, right? Like if you feel like this first round that we're going to, next week or the week after, or you jump in a little bit late because you're hearing this podcast later, and you just want to go back and read through posts, there's a lot of great resources and a lot of things that can be absorbed. And again, just try something. Try moving our learners forward, because it's beyond they deserve it. Literacy is that fundamental human right, and that applies to every one of our complex communicators as much as it does to Johnny, who's sitting in the fourth grade reg ed classroom. And know that progress might be slow, right? And there might be a lot of ups and downs as you're doing it. But I think that's where, finding community and knowing that, again, our ultimate goal, when I think about my learners, when they leave me at 22 from my school system work, I want them to be able, if they have a communication system they can access, but it doesn't have a word they want to tell us, right? Can they spell close enough to use word prediction to convey that novel message, right? That's a critical life skill for them so that they can tell us the food they want to eat if it's not in there, which seems like a trivial thing, but that they can also report if somebody is harming them, that they can also convey if somebody is neglecting them. I think when we think about literacy, sometimes we think about, oh, we get to read books and talk about stories, but it's also just such a critical life skill to make sure that from that point on, they're able to advocate for themselves and their needs.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to one thing you said about modeling failure in front of your learners, but I also think you can model failure in front of paraeducators or other teachers that are either reluctant or not knowing what to do with those kids with complex bodies. Because I will do a group in a classroom and then say, well, that bombed. And I know that because look at how checked out that kid is. I'm out loud about what am I observing? How am I problem solving? What critical thinking skills am I adding to this so that I can alter what I'm doing to increase engagement or to increase or to reach the literacy goal I was going for. for. Turns out I was going for compliance. I didn't even realize
That's probably going to bomb every time. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, I think being willing to go to push in, do literacy stuff, have it fail, learn from it, and then come back the next week, which is really, really hard, especially if you're type 8 or perfectionist or all the things that SLPs typically are known for.
We're supposed to be the
expert in the room.
Yeah. So there's that.
And I think that expertness, that's not a word, that expert quality, I think, can sometimes get in our way as professionals.
Definitely.
And I think because it's hard sometimes, right? Like if a literacy activity or a learner fails at something, again, I'm using air quotes, it's not a failure of the learner, right? That's on us. That means something about that activity was not correctly accessible, was not, high interest enough, didn't meet, I can't tell you how many stories I've written about obscure, Japanese anime characters because it wasn't interest, right?
Right.
To me, it's not on them, it's on us. And it's a hard thing to swallow, especially, maybe not as a I hate calling myself a seasoned professional, but as a brand new grad, that's really hard because you don't want that appearance. But I think the more that we can do that as a profession, the more we're in a space where we don't have maybe the incredible mental health stuff we've got going on in professionals, because I feel like we have to maintain this perfect social media. Everything about my therapy was correct and wonderful. And I think it gives the wrong impression to everyone who's trying to do the hard work of comprehensive literacy. And it's not just comprehensive literacy, but I'm a fan of modeling failure. That sounds weird coming out of my mouth, but I think it's really, really important. Even if it's just verbally saying to the kid, like, that totally did not work the way I meant to. Do you And obviously, usually I get a big smile. I'm like, hey, I feel you. Yeah, that totally didn't work. I am sorry that activity didn't work out. You know what? I'm going to come up with a different way we can try it, and I'll come back and we'll try again.
And then aren't you connecting with that student too in that same way? And I love what you said about that, kind of like we're all human and we all make mistakes and it's okay. We need to see this. And I think that's part of the reason Brendan and I love this podcast, because we talk to people who, are doing the right thing. They're doing all the things and we're like so excited. And then we talk to you and it's like, oh, you're human too. And you have this experience and it's okay. And then that people can hear this. And I think it's so important for us to be able to have these conversations. But Elisa, we could probably have another 12 podcasts with you, which maybe we'll have to line up another. I feel like we could talk to you for a lot longer, but as we wrap up, what do you want people to know about what you're doing right now?
I think the biggest thing, especially when it comes to the Facebook group and kind of helping to mentor people through these rounds, is that, this is more about the community, me providing a structure for the community to engage with this work. And I think, it is definitely a side passion project. And, I don't foresee myself stopping doing it anytime soon, because there are still many, many learners who don't have the literacy skills they need. And, whether you as a new person to comprehensive literacy dive into our book study or it's trying something new, I think it's about just taking one step forward. Start by making the next change. And the work that I am hoping it came across, I'm very passionate about making sure our learners have access to participate in their environments. To me, that's a perfect kind of mashup of my OT brain, my AAC kind of voice, and the literacy heart I have. I want the people who are doing this great research to have some platforms for that great knowledge to be disseminated. Because we are still very much in the infancy of knowing what works for our learners. We have a lot of research behind us, but we don't have years and years and years of, decades of education research that a lot of other places do. So to me, it's about being able to kind of look at situations and figure out, how can what's the next best step for this learner? And that doesn't have to be an overwhelming thing. It can be small. So I encourage people to reach out and join the Facebook group. Or, if they're starting a book study or coaching people through a book study, reach out if they want any of the resources I've posted. But to me, it's about how can we help continue to spread the word that all learners have a right and should and can learn literacy skills.
Well, Elisa,
Wonderful.
thank you so much. I mean, thank you for being so generous with your time. I don't even want to know how much time you spend on this. Your resources, your knowledge base. I mean, not being at all territorial about anything that you're doing. It's just helping the community immensely. It was one of the reasons why we really want to do on here is because we just feel like that your heart is in it for all the right reasons. And by the way, it still is if you decide to charge for something. But I'm just saying, we know that all of us in the industry that are really passionate about this do a lot of outside work, but yours is so helpful for these communities. So first of all, thank you for all that you've done and all the knowledge you've shared. And thanks for being on this podcast because it was really fun. And I hope people take a look at the Facebook page and check out your graphics because I think it's going to hit home for
and I do get some people that email me and say, well, I don't use Facebook and I don't, I've had people make a Facebook account just for the purposes of joining the literacy group, and that's the only thing they use it for. It is absolutely a labor of love, more emphasis on love than labor. And for as long as people are wanting to learn about how to do this, whether it's their learner in their classroom or their student sitting in their home, we'll be there on the Facebook group doing it.
Great. Awesome. And we'll be participating and looking for more. Can't wait to see the next steps. So
of course.
Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me.